Welcome, my name is Squiblydoo. I'm an independent researcher. My background is in anthropological linguistics and cultural anthropology. I'm best known for my work on SolarMarker malware and also my debloat tool to handle with bloated malware. But with no further ado, this is certified bad, one malware, 2 years of certificates. First of all, a few disclaimers. This information isn't intended to shame or endorse any certificate provider. This is just a presentation of the data on its own. Also, my data is not a representative sample of certificate providers. So what are we going to look at? We're going to talk about what are Authenticode certificates. We're going to review the data set, and I'm going to encourage you to revoke abused certificates. Authenticode certificates are a digitally signed certificate of trust for programs. This is the trust from the provider to the software developer. This is part of the system in operating systems to share that there's trust for the program and that it's safe to be ran on your computer. The certificates also contain a hash of the program so that it can validate that there's been no tampering with the program. There are two types of these code signing certificates. There's standard code signing certificates, which require basic identity checks, and extended validation certificates. Extended validation has 3 stages of validation. First, the provider will ensure that the company asking for a certificate exists within a government database. Second, they'll do domain control validation. They'll ensure that the requester is part of a legitimate domain. Third, they'll also have a robot call the number provided to them to ensure that the requester has control of the phone number provided. These certificates are desired by malware actors. Why? Because they're mistakenly trusted by SafeScreen, and they're also mistakenly trusted by analysts. And even these reasons are part of even the marketing within Certum, where they advertise that EV certificates give you reputation from browsers, that it eliminates that unknown publisher message that Microsoft displays, and it eliminates the possibility of being filtered by SmartScreen. So how does the market work in regards to malware actors? The method that we'll primarily be talking about today is actors will impersonate organizations in order to gain a certificate. They'll often create a proof of value to show that they can sign binaries, and then after that, they'll begin signing binaries for threat actors. So the data set we'll be looking at today and from our research comes from SolarMarker. SolarMarker is a modular malware first seen in 2020. It consists of a backdoor, a keylogger, a form grabber, wallet stealer, an info stealer, and a VNC client. The actor always signs the first stage of his payload. In over 2 years, I collected information about each of his payloads and 50 certificates, revoking them each week where he would then get a new certificate. And reviewing VirusTotal for these 50 certificates, I identified 700 binaries that were using these. Over those 2 years, the majority of his certificates were coming from DigiCert, 28 out of the 50. And 26 of these were extended validation certificates. So why is this interesting? Well, this becomes interesting because when you pull those 700 binaries from VirusTotal, what you find isn't just SolarMarker malware. We get into the realm what I call collisions. Collisions is when multiple malware are using the same certificate. And within these 700 binaries, what I identified was 14 distinct malware families. This goes back a little bit to the model that I spoke about a minute ago, where looking at the data, we can see these transactions happening, where an imposter impersonates an organization, receives an extended validation certificate from someone such as Certum. Then we see them sign a binary that was a hello world and upload it to VirusTotal to show that they can sign binaries. 31 days after that, we identified a lock screen malware that this actor had signed. Shortly after that, they signed SolarMarker malware. And these collisions aren't just unknown named malware, but they're often families that are familiar to us. I identified ZLoader, IcedID, Cobalt Strike from multiple actors such as QuackBot. There's Net Support Rat, Rimco's Rat, Bazaar Loader. And if we look at the abuse over time, what we find is that the majority of these certificates were abused within the first 50 days of the issuance. This gave evidence to the fact that they were not issued to legitimate parties or stolen, but they were used by these threat actors, many of them being used within the first week of issuance and some within the first day. After they were abused, they were often not revoked, so they continued to be abused over time. I graphed this information in another way, because when we look at the certificate abuse, what we find is that sometimes the abuse of a certificate to sign multiple malware can happen within a short amount of time, sometimes within a few days, but often over several months. Where the certificate used to sign Bazaar Loader was then used several months later, for example, to sign SolarMarker. However, this abuse becomes possible because of the lack of revocation. So in one concrete example, we see the certificate being used to sign an unknown rat, being signed to sign Juice Ledger, some other unidentified malware, IcedID, and then SolarMarker. Which, in regards to the same certificate, Sentinel Labs had published about Juice Ledger in August of 22, or September of 22. They reported in their article at that time that the certificate had been used to sign other malware, but they failed to get it to be revoked. Several months later, we saw the same certificate showing up signing IcedID and then signing SolarMarker before it was finally revoked at the end of January. Which revocation ends up becoming important because there's a lot of good reasons, because it can impact the market. Because in the first basic scenario we have here, the actor puts in the labor and they spend the money in order to get this certificate. They're able to mark up the price and then sell it to multiple actors. And when they do that, they largely make full profit for the multiple actors that they sell to. However, in the second basic scenario, after the imposter puts in that time and that money, he makes a very small amount of profit from what he can only sell to one actor, and then the certificate's revoked. So revocation reduces the profit for the imposter and increases the cost for everybody else. So these are my key ideas. First of all, malware actors use these third parties to sign their malware. While that's not the exclusive method, it's one we identify and can see through the data. Secondly, these third parties sign multiple malware. And the fact that they sign multiple malware, it creates a common thread between these different malware families. And these certificates become avenues for researchers and for law enforcement as we can see money being traded between these actors. The gist of this presentation and interactive versions of my graphs are available on my blog. If you want to follow up more, that's where I recommend going.